Hey, little buddies, it's Uncle Rick from the Uncle Rick Audiobook Club, where you and I enjoy reading great books together. On today's podcast, I'll be reading a chapter or two from one of the exciting books in the club. I hope you enjoy it. Stick around at the end of the podcast, and I'll tell you how you can listen to the whole book, as well as tons of others that you are going to love.
A Visit with Uncle Rick, a podcast by Rick Boyer of Uncle Rick Audios.
Chapter 5, Inquisition in Tokyo. DeShazer almost lost track of time. How many hours after he had bailed out of his plane before being placed on another plane as a prisoner, he does not know. At any rate, he and his comrades were placed together in a plane similar to a D-3 transport plane and flown to another city. Evidently, the distance was great, for they were in the air a good share of the day. We now know this trip took them to Nanking, China. In the evening, they were taken off the plane and had their first experience of being in an Oriental prison. The cells were made of wooden bars, placed straight up and down. The room was bare, except for a wooden box for a toilet. Guards walked back and forth in front of the cell. Here someone took DeShazer's wristwatch, which he never saw again. A little later, he was led into a room where a group of Japanese officers began questioning him again. Describing this experience, DeShazer says, "One of the officers, using lots of slang, said that I had better talk. He said that these were mean people, and they would torture me until I did talk. I was still blindfolded, as I had been most of the time for over 12 hours, and hadn't eaten all day. I had been asked questions at every opportunity, but I would always tell them that I wouldn't talk. Sometimes they would tell me about places in America where Japan had bombed and taken possession of property. Then they would come up very close to my face and open their mouths and laugh. I was then led into a room, and the blindfold was removed. A little Japanese of stocky build was standing behind a table smoking a cigar, rubbing his hands together and talking really fast in Japanese. Several others were in the room. The man behind the table said through the interpreter, 'I am the kindest judge in all China. I want to treat you real good. Everywhere I have the reputation of being the kindest judge in all China.' We sat down, and the kind judge looked at a paper. Then, through the interpreter, the following conversation took place. 'Judge, how do you pronounce Hornet? DeShazer, Hornet. Judge, and that is the aircraft carrier you flew off to bomb Japan, isn't it? DeShazer, I won't talk. Judge, Colonel Doolittle was your commanding officer, wasn't he? DeShazer, I won't talk. The judge hit the table with his fist and yelled in Japanese. The interpreter translated the judge's words. 'When you speak, look me straight in the eye.' DeShazer says that after that, when questions were asked, he looked the judge straight in the eye when giving his answer. Evidently, he was able to look him out of countenance, where he reports the judge lowered his eyes and looked away. Finally, DeShazer was told that in Japan it was considered a great honor for the judge to get to cut the prisoner's head off. At this point, the judge, looking at DeShazer, said, speaking in English this time, 'Tomorrow morning at sunrise, I am going to have the honor of cutting your head off.' As the reader considers such an experience, knowing the sequel, it seems somewhat humorous. Certainly it was far from humorous for DeShazer. In view of the tenseness of the situation and impending tragedy, one is amazed at DeShazer's answer. From his own account we read, 'I told him I thought it would be a great honor to me if the kindest judge in China cut my head off. The judge and others laughed for the first time, and a little later I was taken to my cell. I lay in the cell all night, blindfolded, handcuffed, without blankets. The next morning at sunrise I was led out of my cell. I had no breakfast. The blindfold was taken off and the handcuffs were removed. I looked around for the judge with his weapon of execution, but I saw a fellow with a camera, and everyone was smiling. After the picture was taken, I was loaded onto a Japanese two-motored transport. Again, I was blindfolded, handcuffed, and tied with ropes. I could hear some of my companions talking, but I was not able to say anything to them. Soon after the plane took to the air, we were given some good ham sandwiches. DeShazer was due to experience more, much more, of the misery of war. It was a new experience to be a captive and no longer to have freedom, to be moved and pushed about according to the whims of the enemy. The flight carried them for several hours over water. In due time they were again over land, and DeShazer heard the Japanese talking excitedly, and, as is sometimes their custom, drawing air through their teeth. Surreptitiously, that means being sneaky, DeShazer peeked out through his blindfold and saw Mount Fuji. By this he knew he was over Japan. A little later they landed and were taken by automobile to another prison. Again, DeShazer and his comrades were subjected to questions. It was obvious the Japanese had found some papers that told the number of airplanes and the names of the crews on each airplane. The name Hornet also was apparently on some of the papers. Evidently, someone had not destroyed all the information, as everyone had been instructed by Colonel Doolittle. DeShazer and his comrades were questioned in great detail regarding the aircraft carrier and the information which had been found on these papers. One of DeShazer's comrades, Lieutenant George Barr, was a real curiosity to the Japanese, because he was 6 feet 2 inches tall and had red hair. Japanese soldiers and Japanese civilians would come and look at him again and again in his cell, as though he were on exhibition. At times they would ask him what he ate and drank in order to get that color of hair. He was the first red-headed person they had ever seen. When Lieutenant Barr asked how he came to be there, he would say that he had jumped out of an airplane, and when he hit the ground he landed on his head. He said that he couldn't remember anything since that had happened. The unexpected and bold attempt of the American airmen to bomb Japan was a great shock to General Headquarters at Tokyo. Well, yeah, that's what it was intended to be. It was intended to show the Japanese people and the American people that the Americans could strike back after being so mercilessly pounded at Pearl Harbor and in several battles in the Pacific after that. General Sugiyama, chief of the General Staff, was greatly enraged at what he called indiscriminate bombing. He declared, quote, "The air raids are a matter of strategic military operation. They should come under the jurisdiction of the military staff headquarters. All the investigations and punishments in regard to the raids will be conducted by our military staff headquarters in Tokyo." Of the 16 raiding planes, 2, unfortunately, entered the areas which were occupied by Japanese forces. The captured flyers of these 2 planes were 8 in number. 5 of them, including DeShazer, were at first sent to Nanking, and 3 were sent to Shanghai. The Japanese military authorities in China promptly notified the Tokyo military headquarters regarding the capture. General Headquarters promptly issued an order to have the captured flyers sent to Tokyo for questioning. This was done. Obviously, the Doolittle air raid had taken the Japanese military authorities off guard. It was a new experience for them. Consequently, there was no precedent. The question immediately arose whether the captured airmen should be treated as war prisoners or as war criminals. From the very outset, General Sugiyama felt they were war criminals and should be executed without delay. As a result of his order, General Shigeru Sawada, I hope I'm pronouncing that close to right, the commanding officer of the 13th Japanese Army stationed at Shanghai, sent the 8 men to Tokyo for trial. Very soon it developed that there was a difference of opinion between the military headquarters and the Japanese War Department. General Sugiyama was insisting upon the death penalty for all 8 captives. General Toho, who was then premier, felt this was too severe. Besides, Japan at the time had no law which declared the death penalty to air raiders who might be captured. In spite of Premier Toho's apparent leniency, he quickly ordered the authorities in Japan to establish a law which would impose the death penalty in order to apply it, if need be, to the captured Doolittle flyers. This is one way General Toho planned to threaten other Allied flyers should they be captured. Such treatment was entirely different from that given to ordinary captives, whose punishment, after a mock trial, was usually torture and imprisonment. The conflict between the military leaders with respect to procedure to be followed delayed the expected trial day after day and week after week. Can you imagine how miserable those guys were waiting to be tried and sentenced? In the meantime, however, the prisoners were called before an examining board again and again. All told, there were 18 days of such inquisition. During these days, the entire 8 men were unable to carry on conversations. The 5 men from DeShazer's plane knew that 3 men had been captured from another plane, but did not know the circumstances of their landing or capture. In the intervals between the questionings, they could hear their voices in another part of the prison. In the Tokyo War Tribunal Court, held after the close of the war, a Mr. Rikichi Tanaka, in testifying concerning the controversy, said, quote, "At the time when Mr. Sato, the chief of the Bureau of Military Affairs, reported that the Army headquarters decided to sentence the flyers to death, General Toho, the war minister, promptly opposed this decision, stating that the action might result in extremely unfavorable consequences to the Japanese nationals interned in America. For this reason, the verdict was postponed for a considerable length of time." Unquote. Further questions and answers, which were given at the Tokyo War Tribunal Court in this connection, will be interesting. Toho's answers to the prosecuting attorney's questions in regard to the fate of the flyers were as follows. Question: The initial verdict was brought on the flyers as an instrument of threat to prevent further raids in Japan or in Japanese-occupied areas. Is this true? Answer: Correct. It was for that reason. It was demanded by the General Headquarters. The Chief of General Staff himself came directly to me to demand a severe punishment for the flyers. He was definitely in favor of the death penalty. Question: Who was the Chief of the General Staff? Answer: He was General Sugiyama. Question: How did you reply to him, and to what extent did you settle the matter? Answer: I agreed and ordered it even to that extent. It was the order directed to the military government. I do not know whether the order was issued in my name or General Headquarters, but at any rate it was my responsibility. General Sugiyama's strategy seems to have been to threaten whoever attempted to undertake such aerial attacks in the future. Heated debates took place between the Army General Headquarters and the Military Police Headquarters over questions that arose, and particularly how and where the real trial should be held. During those days when the prisoners were being played back and forth like pawns in a great chess game, they were constantly undergoing indignities, ill treatment, and torture. The Japanese wanted to find out where the Americans had stored gasoline in China. On one occasion, DeShazer was put on his knees and beaten severely. This brought no information. He was not an officer. Consequently, he had not been given such information. All he could say was that he did not know. Some of the officers were treated even more roughly than DeShazer. Lieutenant Nielsen, navigator from the other plane, was handcuffed and his hands lifted over his head to a peg on the wall. His toes just barely touched the floor. He was stretched out that way for about 8 hours. Some of the other men were stretched out on boards. Towels were placed on their faces and water was poured over their noses and mouths. They would nearly suffocate. All DeShazer can say about it now is, it was very painful. In the War Crimes Court in Tokyo, a statement was made to the effect that the 8 American flyers were the unfortunate victims of war. Speaking of the various types of treatment which the flyers received during this period, Lieutenant Nielsen testified at the court of Shanghai at the conclusion of the war as follows. You state that you were kicked. Where were you kicked? My leg. Who kicked it? A Japanese military police. How hard did he kick it? He kicked me so hard that he even left a scar. By applying this sort of treatment, what did he attempt to secure? They wanted to know the place from where we flew. Did you receive any ill treatment during the first night at Tokyo? If you did, what kind of treatment? I was slapped on my head and face and was kicked on my leg. How were you bound? My arms were bound to the back of the chair and my legs to the chair. About how many people participated in the inquiry? 3 military police, 1 interpreter, and 1 recorder. Where did they kick and slap? They slapped my head and face and kicked my legs so hard that the wound which was received at the Shanghai prison reopened and bled. What kind of questions were you asked? The source of our flight, the question whether we bombed Tokyo during the previous week or not, a question as to our station prior to the Tokyo raid and whether we were real American soldiers. How long did the Inquisition last? Until 4 o'clock in the morning. During this period of time, did they continue to mistreat you? Yes, I was almost continuously beaten and kicked. During the 18 days of Inquisition, were you permitted to shave or take a bath? This type of questioning and treatment continued for approximately 2 months. A memorandum found in the diary of the Minister of the Imperial Household, Mr. Kido, dated May 21st, states, "Some military leaders came into my office to discuss the punishment of the captive flyers. Obviously, the matter had been reported to the imperial court officials. Whether the emperor had taken a hand in the matter at this time or not, the record does not show. In any event, the Japanese Army headquarters in Tokyo finally decided to have the men tried by a court-martial under the 13th Army at Shanghai." Thanks for listening to A Visit with Uncle Rick today, little buddies. That's all we have time for right now. But remember, the whole book is available on the Uncle Rick Audio Book Club at unclerickaudios.com. Why not ask Mom and Dad about joining my club today?